I don't shake hands with people like you. 5 words. Spoken with a smile. Captured on camera. Broadcast live to investors across 3 continents. In that crystallized moment of cruelty, Evelyn Frost, chairwoman of Frost and Sterling Capital, refused the outstretched hand of Nia Carter, the black woman whose $2.4 billion was about to save her company. The room laughed. Polite, practiced laughter that comes easy when power feels permanent. Nia lowered her hand without trembling, her expression unreadable as marble. Everyone watching thought they'd just witnessed a humiliation, a public dismissal, a reminder of who truly belonged in these glass towers. They were catastrophically wrong. What they actually witnessed was the quietest execution of financial power in modern history. The moment a woman they underestimated chose silence over spectacle, strategy over rage. Before you find out how thoroughly Evelyn Frost destroyed herself, I invite you to follow this story to its conclusion. Like and comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this journey travels. The morning had started with the kind of artificial brightness that expensive conference rooms manufacture. All chrome fixtures and floor-to-ceiling windows that turn natural light into currency. 47 floors above Manhattan, the executive boardroom of Frost and Sterling Capital hummed with the particular tension that precedes either triumph or catastrophe. Nia Carter arrived at 9:47 a.m., 13 minutes early, a lifetime habit that her grandmother had insisted revealed character. She wore a charcoal suit tailored to precision, her natural hair swept back in a style that was both professional and unapologetically herself. At 38, she carried the kind of quiet authority that came from building an investment empire from a studio apartment and a laptop, transforming Carter Capital Management from a one-woman operation into a firm that managed $17 billion in assets. The receptionist's eyes widened slightly at her arrival. Not recognition of her name, Nia noted, but surprise at her presence in this particular space. A small tell, but Nia had built her career on reading the margins, the spaces between what people said and what they meant. "Ms. Carter," the young woman said, recovering with professional smoothness. "They're expecting you in conference room A. Can I offer you coffee? Water?" "Water would be perfect, thank you." Nia had learned long ago that gratitude costs nothing and revealed everything about a person's character. She watched the receptionist's shoulders relax fractionally. Another data point filed away in the mental archive that made Nia so formidable at negotiation tables. The hallway to conference room A stretched like a gallery of corporate mythology. Photographs lined the walls. Frost and Sterling's founding in 1923, black and white images of stern men in darker suits, their expressions carved from the same granite as their certainties. The progression through decades showed the firm's evolution. The expansion to international markets in the 60s, the technology boom of the 90s, the survival of the 2008 crisis. Every image radiated permanence, legacy, the assumption of continuity. Nia paused before the most recent photograph. Evelyn Frost accepting an award for financial leadership, her silver hair immaculate, her smile the temperature of November. Third-generation leadership, Dartmouth and Wharton, a woman who'd inherited authority and mistake it for wisdom. Nia had researched her exhaustively, as she researched everything, not just the public accolades but the whispered stories, the pattern of associates who left suddenly, the clients who quietly transferred their portfolios elsewhere. The due diligence had revealed a company in crisis wrapped in prestigious, expensive packaging. Frost and Sterling had over-leveraged on commercial real estate 18 months ago, betting on an urban office renaissance that remote work had permanently derailed. Their quarterly reports, decoded properly, showed a firm hemorrhaging capital while maintaining appearances. They needed Nia's investment, $2.4 billion, in exchange for a strategic partnership that would stabilize their portfolio and give Carter Capital Management access to Frost and Sterling's blue-chip client network. On paper, it was symbiotic. In practice, Nia had learned to watch for the spaces where theory and reality diverged. She entered conference room A precisely at 10:00 a.m. 12 people occupied the space, 10 from Frost and Sterling, one technical specialist managing the live stream equipment that would broadcast this meeting to the firm's international investors, and Marcus Webb, Nia's own attorney, who'd arrived earlier to review documentation. Marcus caught her eye and gave the smallest nod. everything checked out legally. Evelyn Frost sat at the head of the table, because of course she did. 61 years old with the kind of bone structure that photographs well, and the sharp eyes of someone who'd spent decades evaluating assets and finding most of them wanting. To her right sat Theodore Marsh, CFO, a nervous man with excellent spreadsheets and terrible instincts about people. The rest of the executive team arranged themselves in careful hierarchy: senior VPs, the head of international operations, two board members whose presence signaled the gravity of this negotiation. "Ms. Carter," Evelyn's voice carried the cultivated neutrality of expensive education. "Please, sit." Nia moved to the chair directly across from Evelyn, the power position, the place where she could maintain eye contact and read every micro-expression. She set down her leather portfolio, removed a single pen, and waited. "Before we begin," Evelyn continued, "I should mention we're live streaming this negotiation to our investor network. Transparency is paramount at Frost & Sterling. I trust you have no objection?" It was phrased as courtesy, but structured as a test. Nia recognized the game: create slight discomfort, observe the reaction, establish subtle dominance before substantive discussion began. "None whatsoever," Nia said smoothly. "I appreciate organizations that operate in the light." Something flickered in Evelyn's expression. Surprise, perhaps, that her small power play had been acknowledged and neutralized. She recovered quickly, gesturing to the documents spread across the polished table. "Then let's proceed. Theodore, walk us through the terms." For the next 20 minutes, they navigated the technical architecture of the deal. Nia listened with focused attention as Theodore outlined the capital injection schedule, the equity stake Carter Capital would receive, the governance structure that would integrate their operations. Marcus interjected occasionally with clarification requests, his legal precision a useful counterbalance to the financial complexity. Nia took minimal notes. She'd memorized the term sheet weeks ago, had run scenario analysis until she could predict cash flow implications in her sleep. Instead, she watched the room's dynamics, the way junior executives deferred to Evelyn's smallest gesture, the tension in Theodore's shoulders that suggested he understood their company's fragility better than his chairwoman acknowledged, the board members who checked their phones compulsively, monitoring market movements with the anxiety of people watching their legacy dissolve in real time. "The valuation seems optimistic," Nia said when Theodore finished. Her voice remained conversational, almost gentle. "Your commercial real estate portfolio has depreciated 17% since these projections were calculated. Current market analysis suggests continued pressure on urban office space." Theodore's face went carefully blank. Evelyn's smile tightened. "We remain confident in the urban office sector's resilience," Evelyn said. "Remote work is a temporary aberration. People need structure, supervision. They'll return to offices." "Perhaps," Nia conceded, "though I noticed you've personally purchased a second home in the Hamptons, zoned for full-time residents according to public records, with excellent internet infrastructure for remote work." The silence that followed had texture, thick enough to feel against skin. Several executives shifted uncomfortably. Marcus suppressed what might have been a smile. Evelyn's expression frosted over. "My personal real estate decisions are hardly relevant to Frost & Sterling's investment thesis." "Of course not," Nia agreed pleasantly. "I simply appreciate when leadership's private convictions align with their public positions. It suggests integrity." The word hung in the air like a sword balanced on its point. Evelyn understood perfectly well that she'd been called a hypocrite with impeccable politeness. The art of high-stakes negotiation, Nia had learned, was delivering hard truths in soft packaging. "Perhaps we should address the valuation adjustment," Theodore interjected, his peacemaker instincts sharp. "We anticipated some negotiation on the equity percentage." "Actually," Evelyn cut him off, "I think we need to address something more fundamental." She leaned back in her chair, assuming the posture of someone about to deliver difficult wisdom. Nia recognized it instantly. She'd seen this exact body language in 1,000 meetings, usually right before someone explained why she didn't quite fit, why her approach was too aggressive, why perhaps she should reconsider her tone. "Ms. Carter, your firm has certainly achieved notable success," Evelyn began, her pause before notable, heavy with subtext. But Frost and Sterling has operated for over a century on principles of discretion, tradition, and frankly, a certain caliber of institutional relationships. We serve families whose wealth predates the modern financial system. They expect a particular standard. I'm familiar with high net worth client service, Nia said evenly. Carter Capital manages portfolios for 17 families with assets exceeding $500 million. New money, Evelyn said, as if the term explained everything, which operates differently than legacy wealth. Our clients value continuity, shared history, cultural alignment. They're accustomed to working with firms that understand their world intimately. Marcus's pen stopped moving. Across the table, one of the younger executives, a woman Nia vaguely recognized from industry conferences, looked intensely uncomfortable. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Nia asked, though she knew perfectly well. She wanted Evelyn to say it explicitly, wanted it captured on the live stream that was broadcasting this conversation to investors across 3 continents. "I'm suggesting," Evelyn said, her smile returning with an edge like cut glass, "that perhaps this partnership isn't the right cultural fit. Your methods are undoubtedly effective for your client base, but Frost and Sterling requires a different approach. More traditional, more established." The words were careful, legally vetted, designed to communicate exclusion without actionable discrimination. Nia had heard variations of this speech her entire career, from the professor who'd suggested investment banking wasn't natural for someone with her background, from the firm that had passed her over for promotion because clients might be more comfortable with other representatives, from the venture capitalist who'd explained that her fund's focus on diverse founders was admirable but not scalable. She'd built Carter Capital Management in defiance of every polite dismissal, every suggestion that she didn't quite belong in rooms like this one. "I see," Nia said softly. "So to clarify, you're declining the $2.4 billion capital injection because of concerns about cultural fit?" "I'm suggesting we table this discussion," Evelyn corrected. "Perhaps revisit in 6 months when what?" Nia interrupted, her voice still calm but now carrying an edge. "When your commercial real estate losses have compounded. When your Q3 report reveals the leverage crisis you're currently masking. When your largest institutional investors demand explanation for why you rejected capital that could have stabilized your portfolio." Theodore had gone pale. The board members exchanged glances that communicated very clearly that they hadn't been fully briefed on the extent of the firm's exposure. "Ms. Carter," Evelyn said, ice crystallizing in her tone, "I don't appreciate implications about our financial stability." "Then perhaps you should review your own documentation more carefully," Nia replied, opening her portfolio and extracting a single sheet of paper. "This is your current exposure analysis, which your CFO provided as part of due diligence. According to these numbers, you have 4 months of operating capital at current burn rate. After that, you'll need to either liquidate assets at depressed valuations or accept terms from creditors that will effectively end Frost & Sterling's operational independence." She slid the paper across the table. Evelyn didn't touch it, but her jaw tightened fractionally. "Unless, of course," Nia continued, "you secure the exact kind of strategic capital investment that I'm offering, which would give you runway to restructure properly, maintain client confidence, and preserve the legacy you've mentioned so fondly." "There are other investors," Evelyn said. "Not at these terms. Not with this timeline." Nia leaned forward slightly. "Mrs. Frost, I came here prepared to partner with an institution I respected. I brought capital, expertise, and a client network that would have strengthened your firm considerably. What I'm hearing suggests you'd rather preserve, what did you call it, cultural alignment? Even if it means jeopardizing everything your grandfather built." The mention of Evelyn's grandfather, the firm's legendary founder, landed like a slap. Several executives flinched. "How dare you?" Evelyn started. "I dare because I have $2.4 billion that your company desperately needs," Nia said, her voice never rising above conversational volume. "I dare because I've spent 6 weeks conducting due diligence that your own board apparently hasn't reviewed carefully. And I dare because every minute of this conversation is being broadcast to investors who are currently watching their confidence in Frost & Sterling's leadership evaporate in real time. She stood, smoothing her suit jacket with deliberate calm. I came here in good faith, Mrs. Frost. I came prepared to build something valuable together. But I won't beg to be allowed into rooms where my presence is treated as a compromise rather than an asset. Nia extended her hand across the table, the universal gesture of professional closure, of transactions completed or declined with mutual respect. Evelyn stared at the outstretched hand for 3 long seconds. Then she smiled, that same cold smile from the photograph in the hallway. I don't shake hands with people like you. The words dropped into the room like stones into still water. Ripples of shock radiated outward. Executives froze mid-breath, Theodore's mouth opened soundlessly, Marcus's face went very still in the way that meant he was already calculating legal implications. Nia kept her hand extended for 1 more second, long enough for the live stream cameras to capture the moment perfectly. Her professional gesture, Evelyn's refusal, the contempt written clearly across the chairwoman's features. Then Nia lowered her hand slowly, her expression unreadable. I see, she said quietly. Thank you for clarifying your position. She gathered her portfolio, nodded to Marcus, and walked toward the door with measured steps that suggested complete composure. Behind her, nervous laughter rippled through the Frost and Sterling executives. Relief that tension had broken, discomfort at what they'd witnessed, uncertainty about what came next. Nia reached the door and paused, her hand on the polished chrome handle. Mrs. Frost, she said without turning around, you should know that the investment agreement you declined included a clause, Section 8.3, if you'd like to reference your copy, that allows immediate withdrawal of committed capital if material misconduct occurs during negotiation. Given that this meeting is being live-streamed and recorded, I now have documented evidence of discriminatory treatment. She turned back to face the room, her expression still calm, still professional. I'm invoking Clause 8.3. Effective immediately, all committed capital is withdrawn. Additionally, per Section 8, 3 subsection C, I'm entitled to liquidate any preliminary investments made during the due diligence period, approximately $180 million currently held in Frost and Sterling instruments, with immediate settlement. Theodore's face went from pale to ashen. Ms. Carter, if you liquidate that position in current market conditions, it will trigger margin calls on your over-leveraged real estate portfolio, Nia finished. Yes, I'm aware. She looked directly at Evelyn, who had finally lost her smile entirely. You were right that we don't share cultural alignment, Mrs. Frost. I believe in earning respect through competence and delivering value through partnership. You apparently believe in something else entirely. Nia turned back to the door. My attorney will handle the technical execution. I expect full compliance within 2 hours per the contractual terms you signed. Enjoy your legacy. She walked out. The hallway seemed brighter than before, or perhaps it was just that Nia's vision had sharpened with absolute clarity of purpose. She moved toward the elevators with steady steps, Marcus materializing at her shoulder like a guardian spirit. That was spectacular, he murmured. Also possibly career-defining. Also possibly nuclear. Execute Clause 8.3, Nia said, her voice level. Immediately. I want every dollar out of Frost and Sterling before lunch. Marcus pulled out his phone, already typing rapidly. The market impact is going to be significant. When we liquidate 180 million of their instruments, I'm aware of the impact. Nia pressed the elevator button. That's the point. The elevator arrived, doors sliding open with a soft chime that sounded absurdly cheerful. They stepped inside, and as the doors closed, Nia caught her reflection in the polished steel, composed, professional, unshaken. Her phone buzzed. Then again. Then continuously as notifications flooded in. The live stream had reached social media. Nia pulled up Twitter and watched in real time as the clip spread. 30 seconds of footage showing her extended hand, Evelyn's refusal, those 5 poisonous words. I don't shake hands with people like you. Already it had been retweeted 4,000 times. The comments section exploded with fury, support, disbelief, solidarity. Another notification, this one from her head of communications. Nia, are you seeing this? The clip is everywhere. We're getting interview requests from every major outlet. How do you want to respond? Nia typed back quickly. No interviews. Focus on executing the withdrawal. I want confirmation of full liquidation by 1 p.m. The elevator descended smoothly, floor numbers ticking down like a countdown. Marcus was on his phone, coordinating with their trading desk, with legal team, with the compliance officers who would ensure everything happened by the book. Trading desk confirms, he said. They're initiating liquidation protocols now. Settlement will complete within 90 minutes. Good. They reached the lobby, and Nia walked through it with the same measured pace she'd maintained upstairs. No hurrying, no visible agitation, just a woman leaving a meeting, her business concluded. Outside, Manhattan assaulted her senses. Car horns and construction noise and the perpetual roar of a city that never paused for anyone's personal drama. Nia's driver pulled up immediately, the black sedan materializing like clockwork. She slid into the back seat, and only then, in the privacy of tinted windows, did she allow herself to exhale fully. Marcus climbed in beside her. Legal is already gaming out their response options. They could try to claim breach of contract, argue that Clause 8.3 doesn't apply. It applies, Nia said firmly. We documented discriminatory conduct on a live stream broadcast to hundreds of investors. Any judge who watches that footage will uphold the withdrawal. Agreed, but they might try to delay settlement, tie things up in court long enough to… Nia's phone rang. Unknown number. She answered anyway. Ms. Carter, this is Rachel Kim from the Wall Street Journal. I'm writing about the incident at Frost & Sterling this morning. Do you have a comment on… Nia ended the call. It rang again immediately. Different number. She declined it. We need a statement, Marcus said. The silence is going to get interpreted as weakness or uncertainty. The silence, Nia corrected, is strategy. I'm not going to explain myself to reporters when the footage speaks clearly enough. Evelyn Frost refused to shake my hand and explicitly stated she doesn't shake hands with people like me. That statement requires no interpretation. Her phone buzzed with a text from James Chen, her head of investor relations. Nia, our clients are calling. They want to know if the clip is real, what it means for CCM, whether you're okay. I need guidance on messaging. Nia typed back. Tell them I'm fine, and Carter Capital Management continues normal operations. The Frost & Sterling situation is a terminated negotiation. Nothing more. Our portfolio remains strong and our investment thesis unchanged. The car glided through midtown traffic, and Nia watched the city slide past her window. Somewhere in this forest of steel and glass, markets were beginning to react. Algorithms were processing news of her liquidation, adjusting risk calculations, repricing Frost & Sterling's exposure. She wondered how long it would take Evelyn Frost to understand what she'd done. Her phone rang again, this time a number she recognized. David Morrison, CEO of Morrison Financial, one of her longtime clients, and a mentor who'd supported her since her early days in the industry. She answered. David? Nia, I just watched the clip. His voice carried something between fury and pride. Please tell me you're burning their house down. Despite everything, Nia smiled. I invoked Clause 8.3. A pause. Then David laughed, deep, genuine laughter that probably disturbed his entire office. Oh, they have no idea what's about to hit them. Nia, do you need anything? Legal support, capital deployment, character witnesses? I will personally call every journalist in New York and explain exactly who Evelyn Frost insulted. I need you to trust that I have this handled, Nia said. And maybe spread the word among your network that Carter Capital Management remains open for business and committed to our investment principles. Consider it done. Nia, what you did in that room, walking out with your dignity intact, that took more strength than they'll ever understand. After they hung up, Nia sat in silence for several blocks. Marcus was still coordinating logistics, his phone a constant stream of updates and confirmations. Outside, New York continued its relentless pace, indifferent to personal dramas and corporate catastrophes alike. Another text notification, this one from her younger sister, Maya. NIA, I just saw the video. Are you okay? Do I need to come up there and burn down a building? I will fly to New York right now. Nia smiled despite herself and typed back, I'm fine. No arson necessary. Maybe just keep watching the news. Maya's response came immediately. I'm so proud of you I could cry. Also, I'm sharing this video with everyone I know. That woman's face when you walked out? Iconic. The car pulled up to Carter Capital Management's office building, a sleek tower in Hudson Yards, all glass and modern architecture that announced success without ostentation. Nia had chosen the location deliberately 3 years ago, when the firm's growth required expansion beyond her original modest offices. She wanted space that reflected excellence while remaining grounded, ambitious without being arrogant. Now, as she walked through the lobby toward her private elevator, she felt the weight of what came next settling onto her shoulders. This wasn't just about one humiliating encounter or one withdrawn investment. This was about what happened when someone with real power decided to demonstrate it publicly. She reached her office, corner suite, 23rd floor, windows overlooking the Hudson River. Her assistant, Jordan, was already waiting with updates. Nia, the trading desk confirms full liquidation completed at 12:47 p.m. Settlement processing now. Also, you have 47 interview requests. The SEC called asking for documentation of the Clause 8. 3 invocation. And, Jordan paused, consulting their tablet. Evelyn Frost's attorney just sent a cease and desist letter demanding you halt all liquidation immediately. Nia set down her bag carefully. Forward the cease and desist to Marcus. He'll handle it. Confirm to the SEC that we're providing full documentation. Decline all interview requests with a standard no comment at this time response. There's one more thing. Jordan's expression shifted slightly. Your mother called. She saw the video. Nia closed her eyes briefly. Of course her mother had seen it. By now, probably everyone had seen it. I'll call her tonight, Nia said. Right now, I need you to pull together a comprehensive analysis of Frost & Sterling's current market exposure. I want to know exactly what happens when 180 million exits their system. Jordan nodded and left. Nia walked to her windows and looked out at the river, at the city sprawling in all directions, at the world that continued spinning regardless of personal catastrophes. Her phone rang. Marcus. Their attorney is threatening an injunction, he said without preamble. Claiming Clause 8.3 doesn't apply because Evelyn's statement wasn't explicit discrimination. They're arguing that I don't shake hands with people like you isn't discriminatory. Their position is that it's ambiguous, could refer to investment style, business philosophy, any number of non-protected characteristics. Nia laughed, a sharp sound without humor. Marcus, we have it on video. In context. After she specifically criticized my methods as not fitting their traditional culture. Any reasonable person watching that footage knows exactly what she meant. I agree, but they're going to fight this. An injunction hearing is scheduled for 4 p.m. today. Judge Harrison is presiding. Nia checked her watch. 2 hours. Then we'd better prepare our case. I want that footage, the complete term sheet with Clause 8.3 highlighted, and documentation of every communication we've had with Frost & Sterling over the past 6 weeks. I want to show Judge Harrison exactly how professional we were throughout this process. Already compiling. Nia, are you sure about this strategy? If we push forward and the judge rules against us, it could set precedent that undermines discrimination protections across the industry. And if we back down, Nia countered, we send a message that people like Evelyn Frost can dismiss us publicly and face no consequences. I'd rather fight and lose than validate her behavior through silence. Understood. I'll see you in court. Nia spent the next 90 minutes in preparation mode that she recognized from her early career, the hyper-focused state where nothing existed except the task at hand. She reviewed documentation, rehearsed arguments, anticipated counterpositions. Jordan brought her lunch that she barely tasted. Messages flooded in from colleagues, clients, former classmates, all expressing support or outrage or solidarity. She ignored most of them. At 3:30 p.m., Marcus appeared at her door. Car's ready. We should go. The courthouse was chaos. Reporters clustered on the steps, cameras tracking every arrival, shouted questions forming a wall of noise. Nia walked through it with Marcus at her side, saying nothing, her expression composed. Inside, the halls were quieter but still charged with tension. They found their courtroom and entered to discover Frost & Sterling's legal team already assembled, 4 attorneys in expensive suits, led by Catherine Wells, a partner at one of Manhattan's most prestigious firms. Catherine approached with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Ms. Carter, I'm hoping we can resolve this reasonably without wasting the court's time. Then you should advise your client to honor the contract she signed, Naya replied evenly. My client believes you're misinterpreting an ambiguous clause. Your client refused to shake my hand and stated she doesn't shake hands with people like me. On camera, during a live-streamed business meeting. There's nothing ambiguous about it. Catherine's smile tightened. We have a different interpretation of those events. I'm sure you do. Judge Harrison entered, a woman in her mid-50s with the brisk efficiency of someone who'd seen every variation of corporate legal theater. She settled behind the bench and reviewed documents briefly. This is an emergency hearing regarding enforcement of a liquidation clause, she said. Miss Wells, you're seeking an injunction to halt Ms. Carter's withdrawal of investment capital. Please present your argument. Catherine stood, her presentation polished and professional. Your Honor, this case hinges on interpretation of Contract Clause 8.3, which allows capital withdrawal in cases of material misconduct. Frost and Sterling argues that no such misconduct occurred. What happened was a business disagreement. My client expressed concerns about cultural fit between the firms. Ms. Carter interpreted this as discriminatory, but the statement in question, I don't shake hands with people like you, is ambiguous. It could refer to aggressive negotiation tactics, to investment philosophy, to any number of business-related factors. Judge Harrison looked unimpressed. Counsel, I've watched the video. In context, the statement appears quite clear. Context can be misleading, Your Honor. We have affidavits from Frost and Sterling executives stating they understood Mrs. Frost's comment to reference Ms. Carter's confrontational approach during the meeting. I'd like to see those affidavits, the judge interrupted, and I'd like to understand how refusing to shake someone's hand constitutes normal business protocol under any interpretation. Catherine faltered slightly, but recovered. Business relationships end for many reasons, Your Honor. Mrs. Frost was within her rights to decline a partnership she felt was inappropriate. By refusing a handshake on camera, Judge Harrison turned to Nia. Ms. Carter, your response? Nia stood, and suddenly she wasn't in a courtroom but back in every space where she'd had to prove her right to exist, every classroom where professors dismissed her questions, every firm where colleagues doubted her competence, every negotiation where men assumed she was the assistant rather than the principal. Your Honor, I came to that meeting prepared to invest $2.4 billion in a struggling firm. I conducted thorough due diligence, offered favorable terms, and engaged professionally throughout weeks of negotiation. When Mrs. Frost criticized my methods as insufficiently traditional and my approach as unsuited to their established culture, I responded with factual analysis of their financial position. I remained professional even when she questioned whether I understood the kind of clients they serve. Nia paused, letting the record reflect the full picture. Then, at the conclusion of our meeting, I extended my hand in the universal gesture of professional courtesy. Mrs. Frost refused to shake it and stated explicitly that she doesn't shake hands with people like me. Your Honor, I'm a black woman in an industry where people who look like me represent less than 2% of senior leadership. When someone refuses my hand and says they don't shake hands with people like me, there is no ambiguity about the message. Judge Harrison nodded slowly. Ms. Wells, your client could have declined the partnership with a simple, "We're not proceeding." She could have shaken hands and wished Ms. Carter well. Instead, she chose to refuse a handshake and make a statement that, in any reasonable interpretation, communicated contempt. That constitutes misconduct under standard business practice, let alone the specific terms of this contract. Your Honor, I'm denying the injunction, Judge Harrison said firmly. Clause 8.3 clearly applies. Ms. Carter is entitled to withdraw her capital and liquidate preliminary investments as specified in the contract. Frost and Sterling signed these terms and must honor them. Catherine started to object, but the judge's expression made clear the decision was final. This hearing is concluded. Outside the courtroom, reporters surged forward. Nia said nothing, simply walked through the crowd with Marcus clearing a path. They reached the car and climbed inside, and only then did Marcus allow himself a grin. We won. We enforced a contract we should never have needed, Nia corrected. That's not winning. That's basic professional courtesy being legally mandated. Her phone showed 37 new notifications. She ignored them all except one. A news alert from Bloomberg. Frost and Sterling Capital stock plunges. 23% as Carter withdraws 2.4B investment. The article outlined the market impact in technical detail. The liquidation of Nia's preliminary investments had triggered margin calls on Frost and Sterling's over-leveraged real estate portfolio, forcing them to sell assets at depressed valuations, which had cascaded into broader confidence crisis among investors. The firm's stock had entered freefall. Another alert followed seconds later. Evelyn Frost released as chairwoman, emergency board meeting called. Nia set down her phone and stared out at the city passing by her window. This was the moment she'd known was coming from the instant she invoked Clause 8. 3. The point where abstract principles became concrete consequences, where standing up for herself meant watching someone else's empire collapse. She should have felt triumphant, victorious, vindicated. Instead, she felt tired. "Are you okay?" Marcus asked quietly. Nia considered the question seriously. Was she okay? She'd been publicly humiliated, had responded by decimating a century-old financial institution, had spent the afternoon in court defending her basic right to professional respect. The video of her extended, refused hand was currently being shared by millions of people who either celebrated her strength or criticized her reaction as excessive. "I'm okay," she said finally. "I'm also exhausted and angry and sad that this was necessary, but I'm okay." Her phone rang, her mother finally calling back after the initial voicemail. Nia answered. "Hi, Mom." Nia Marie Carter. Her mother's voice carried that particular blend of fury and pride that only mothers could achieve. "I just watched that woman refuse to shake your hand. I want you to know that I'm very proud of you for walking away with dignity, and also I'm getting on a plane to New York so I can personally speak to Mrs. Frost about manners." Despite everything, Nia laughed, real laughter that released some of the tension coiled in her chest. "Mom, I don't think that's necessary. I handled it." "Oh, I saw how you handled it. The whole world saw. Nia, do you know how many people have called me today? Your Aunt Regina saw it on Facebook. Your cousin Marcus, the other Marcus, not your lawyer Marcus, sent it to the entire family group chat. Mrs. Henderson from church called to ask if you need prayers." "I probably do need prayers," Nia admitted. "Well, you're getting them whether you need them or not. But Nia, baby, I need you to tell me the truth. How are you really doing?" Nia closed her eyes and let herself feel the full weight of the day. The casual cruelty of Evelyn's refusal, the cold calculation required to invoke Clause 8.3, the courtroom battle to enforce basic dignity, the market chaos that had followed. All of it was necessary. None of it should have been. "I'm hurt, Mom. I'm angry. I'm proud that I stood up for myself, but tired that I had to. And I'm worried about what happens next because this story isn't over." "No," her mother agreed. "I don't think it is. But Nia, you listen to me. Whatever happens next, you face it the same way you faced everything else, with your head up and your standards high. That woman tried to make you feel small. You reminded her that you're not the one who should be ashamed. That's what matters." They talked for a few more minutes, her mother sharing updates from home, normal family news that felt grounding after the surreal intensity of the day. When they hung up, Nia felt fractionally more settled. The car pulled up to her apartment building in the village. Nia thanked her driver and walked through the lobby, nodding to the doorman who'd seen her come and go for 5 years and knew better than to ask about her day when she looked like this. Inside her apartment, silence wrapped around her like a blanket. She kicked off her heels, poured a glass of wine she didn't drink, and finally allowed herself to sit down on her couch and simply exist without performing strength or composure for anyone. Her phone continued buzzing with notifications, messages, news alerts. She turned it face down and didn't look at it. Tomorrow, there would be more battles. More interviews request to decline, more legal maneuvering from Frost and Sterling, more public dissection of those 5 terrible words. There would be think pieces about race and finance, about discrimination in corporate America, about whether her response was justified or excessive. There would be supporters and critics, allies and opportunists. But tonight, Nia allowed herself to simply feel what had happened, The sting of casual contempt, the cold satisfaction of strategic response, the complicated aftermath of making power visible. She'd been told her entire career that success meant fitting in, meant making powerful people comfortable, meant smoothing over slights and accepting disrespect as the price of access. Today, she'd chosen differently, and the world would never look quite the same. The morning after this courthouse victory arrived with the peculiar brightness that follows storms, sharp-edged and unforgiving. Nia woke at 5:47 a.m. to her phone vibrating with an intensity that suggested the world had continued spinning without pause while she'd attempted sleep. She'd managed perhaps 4 hours, fragmented by dreams where she extended her hand again and again to people who turned away, their faces blurring into an endless parade of rejection. She reached for her phone and immediately regretted it. The notifications had multiplied overnight like invasive species: 673 unread emails, 89 text messages, 12 voicemails, and a flood of social media mentions that her assistant had wisely muted, but that still registered as a relentless red number climbing into the thousands. The clip of Evelyn's refusal had gone genuinely viral now, transcending finance industry circles to become a broader cultural flashpoint. Late-night comedians had referenced it. Politicians had tweeted about it. Someone had created a remix that overlaid Evelyn's words with dramatic music and posted it to TikTok, where it had accumulated 3.2 million views. Nia set the phone down and stared at her ceiling, trying to remember what normal mornings felt like before she became the main character in a story she hadn't wanted to star in. Her phone rang, Jordan calling at an hour that meant something urgent had developed. "I'm sorry to call so early," Jordan said without preamble, "but you need to see the Wall Street Journal. Front page." Nia pulled up the website on her tablet. The headline hit her like cold water. The handshake that shattered a dynasty. Inside Nia Carter's calculated destruction of Frost and Sterling capital. The article was comprehensive, thoroughly researched, and completely invasive. It detailed her background, the scholarship to Yale, the early career at firms where she'd been the only black woman in analyst classes of 60 people, the gutsy decision to start her own firm with $200,000 in capital and a belief that she could build something better. It outlined Carter Capital Management's growth trajectory with charts and graphs that made her success look simultaneously impressive and vaguely threatening. It included quotes from unnamed sources at Frost and Sterling calling her aggressive and vindictive, counterbalanced by quotes from her supporters calling her courageous and principled. But what made Nia's stomach tighten was the sidebar analysis. Market impact of the Carter withdrawal. The article calculated that Frost and Sterling's stock collapse had wiped out $847 million in shareholder value. It estimated that the forced asset liquidation would cost the firm another $200 million in losses. It quoted financial analysts predicting that Frost and Sterling would need to either merge with a larger institution or accept a private equity takeover that would effectively end its independence. The article made Nia sound like both a hero and a weapon of mass financial destruction, and she wasn't sure which characterization disturbed her more. She called Jordan back. "I saw it. There's more. Bloomberg ran a similar piece, so did the Financial Times. You're on the cover of 3 major financial publications simultaneously. Also, Jordan paused in a way that meant worse news was coming. Evelyn Frost gave an interview to CNBC. It's airing at 7 a.m. Nia checked her watch. 12 minutes. "Send me the link when it goes live." She showered quickly, dressed in a navy suit that projected calm authority, and made coffee she didn't want but needed. At precisely 7 o'clock a.m., the interview began streaming on her laptop. Evelyn appeared diminished somehow, despite the professional styling and carefully chosen setting of what looked like a library with expensive books as backdrop. Her silver hair was still immaculate, her posture still perfect, but something in her eyes had shifted, the absolute certainty replaced by something more fragile. The interviewer, a sharply professional woman named Amanda Chen, wasted no time on pleasantries. "Mrs. Frost, let's address what everyone's talking about. You refused to shake Nia Carter's hand and stated you don't shake hands with people like her. What did you mean by that?" Evelyn's smile was practiced, apologetic in a way that felt calculated rather than genuine. "Amanda, I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding. What I meant was that I don't shake hands with people who approach negotiations with such aggressive tactics. Ms. Carter was confrontational during our meeting, questioning our business practices, making implications about our financial stability. I was responding to her negotiation style, not to anything about her personally. But you specifically said people like you while looking directly at her. A poor choice of words in a tense moment. I regret the phrasing, but the intent was purely professional. I've worked with diverse executives throughout my career. This was never about race or gender. It was about incompatible business philosophies. Nia watched with the detached fascination of someone observing a carefully choreographed performance. Evelyn had clearly been coached extensively, acknowledged the optics, expressed regret for poor phrasing, reframed the incident as a business disagreement, emphasized the diversity of her professional relationships as shield against discrimination accusations. It was textbook crisis management, and it might have worked if not for the footage that now existed in perpetuity, showing Evelyn's contemptuous smile and the deliberate cruelty of her refusal. Mrs. Frost, Amanda continued, Nia Carter invoked a contract clause allowing her to withdraw $2.4 billion in committed capital. A judge upheld that withdrawal. Do you believe her response was proportionate? Evelyn's composure slipped fractionally. I think Ms. Carter's reaction was extreme and vindictive. She used a minor business disagreement as justification to destroy a century-old institution that employs over 800 people. Those employees are now facing uncertainty about their jobs, their futures, because Ms. Carter decided that her personal feelings mattered more than their livelihoods. The pivot was smooth, from defending herself to positioning as defender of innocent employees, making Nia the villain who valued pride over people's welfare. Our firm has weathered the Great Depression, multiple market crashes, the 2008 crisis, Evelyn said, her voice carrying emotion that might have been genuine. We've been a pillar of stability in this industry for generations, and now because of one woman's oversensitivity and disproportionate response to a simple misunderstanding, all of that legacy is at risk. Nia's phone exploded with messages as the interview continued, colleagues expressing outrage at Evelyn's characterization, clients reaffirming their support, her sister Maya sending a stream of increasingly profane texts about Evelyn's audacity, and underneath it all, the growing chorus of voices online, some supporting her stance, others questioning whether she'd gone too far, whether the punishment exceeded the crime, whether $847 million in destroyed shareholder value was justified by a refused handshake. She turned off the interview and sat in the silence of her apartment, trying to sort through the complicated knot of emotions tangling in her chest. She'd known this would happen, the reframing, the victim narrative, the attempt to make her power look like petulance. She'd prepared for it intellectually, but experiencing it was different from anticipating it. Her phone rang. David Morrison again. Please tell me you saw that interview, he said. I saw enough. Nia, she's trying to make you look like you torpedoed a firm out of spite. You need to respond publicly, set the record straight. David, I gave my response already. I walked out of that room with my dignity intact. I enforced a contract that she signed. I don't need to justify basic professional standards. I know that, but the narrative is getting away from you. Every minute you stay silent, Evelyn gets to define the story. She's positioning herself as the victim of an overreaction, and people who don't know you might believe it. Nia walked to her window and looked out at the city beginning its morning commute. Thousands of people heading to offices and job sites and meetings, all of them navigating their own complicated relationships with power and dignity and respect. What would you have me say, David? That I'm sorry for enforcing consequences when someone treated me with contempt? That I should have smiled and accepted her refusal because maintaining her comfort matters more than my self-respect? No. But you could explain your reasoning. Help people understand why this wasn't about revenge. It was about standards. The footage explains my reasoning. Anyone who watches it honestly knows exactly what happened. Nia, David, I appreciate your support, but I'm not going to spend my energy defending the decision to expect basic professional courtesy. If people want to believe Evelyn's version, that refusing to shake someone's hand and calling them people like you is just a business disagreement, then no amount of explaining from me will change their minds. After they hung up, Nia allowed herself 5 minutes to feel the full weight of what she'd chosen. Because David was right. Her silence was a strategic decision that carried risks. In the court of public opinion, the loudest voice often won, regardless of truth. Evelyn was giving interviews, crafting narratives, positioning herself sympathetically. Nia was giving no interviews, making no statements, letting the footage speak for itself. It was either a demonstration of strength or a tactical error, and she wouldn't know which until the story finished writing itself. She arrived at Carter Capital Management's offices at 8:15 a.m. to find her entire team already assembled. Jordan had coffee waiting. Marcus had overnight legal briefs stacked neatly on her desk. Her head of communications, Simone Washington, stood near the windows with an expression that meant she had opinions that needed expressing. "Before you say anything," Simone began, "I need you to know that my professional advice is to do a major interview. 60 Minutes has reached out. So has Fresh Air. The New York Times wants an in-depth profile. We have options for you to tell your side. And my personal opinion," Simone continued, "is that you shouldn't have to justify yourself at all. But those are the contradictory truths we're working with." Nia set down her bag and faced her team. These people who'd built something meaningful alongside her, who understood that Carter Capital Management wasn't just a firm but a statement about what was possible when you refused to accept other people's limitations. "Here's what I need from each of you," Nia said. "Jordan, I need you to compile every piece of correspondence between us and Frost & Sterling over the past 6 weeks. Every email, every meeting note, every term sheet revision. I want a complete record showing how professional and thorough we were throughout this process." Jordan nodded, already taking notes. "Marcus, I need you to prepare for the countersuit that Frost & Sterling will inevitably file. They're going to claim breach of contract, tortious interference, anything they can think of to recoup losses. I want us ready. Already on it, I've got 3 associate attorneys reviewing precedent cases. Simone, I need you to monitor the narrative but not engage with it. Track what's being said, who's saying it, how the story's evolving. But no statements from us unless I explicitly approve them. Our position is that the contract speaks for itself." "Nia," Simone said carefully. "Staying silent while Evelyn controls the narrative is risky. People fill silence with their own interpretations. Then let them. Anyone who watches that footage and doesn't understand what happened isn't someone whose opinion I'm trying to change." The team dispersed to execute their assignments, and Nia settled into her office with the stack of legal briefs Marcus had prepared. She was 3 pages into an analysis of tortious interference case law when her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize, but a New York area code that suggested local media. She answered against her better judgment. "Ms. Carter, this is Rebecca Torres from the New York Times. I'm writing a comprehensive piece about the incident at Frost & Sterling, and I'd really value your perspective. I want to make sure your voice is represented fairly." "I appreciate that, Rebecca, but I'm not giving interviews." "I understand, but I should let you know that I've already spoken with several Frost & Sterling executives. They're providing extensive background about the negotiation, about their perspective on what happened. Without your input, the piece will be one-sided. It was a well-deployed pressure tactic, the implicit threat that silence would result in unfavorable coverage. Nia recognized it because she'd seen variations of it her entire career. "Rebecca, you have access to the same footage everyone else does. You can see exactly what happened. I extended my hand professionally, and Evelyn Frost refused it with a statement that was, at minimum, disrespectful, and more honestly, discriminatory. Those are observable facts that don't require my commentary. But people want to understand your motivations. Why invoke the withdrawal clause? Why not pursue other remedies? Some are saying the response was disproportionate. Some people," Nia interrupted gently, "think that women, particularly black women, should accept mistreatment gracefully and without consequence. I'm not interested in validating that perspective through debate. The contract I signed included specific provisions for addressing misconduct. I used them. That's the story. So you don't feel any responsibility for the 800 Frost & Sterling employees who might lose their jobs?" The question was designed to provoke defensiveness, to make Nia sound callous about collateral damage. She'd expected it. "I feel tremendous sympathy for those employees. But their job security was threatened the moment Evelyn Frost overleveraged the firm on bad real estate bets. Not when I enforced the consequences of her decision to treat me with contempt. If she'd shaken my hand and concluded our meeting professionally, those employees would be starting their day at a newly capitalized firm with improved stability. Instead, they're facing uncertainty because their chairwoman valued her prejudices more than their welfare. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. That's a powerful statement. Can I quote you on that? No, Nia said, because I'm not giving interviews, but you can think about the logic for yourself. After hanging up, Nia realized her hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline that came with articulating truths she'd spent years keeping diplomatically muted. How many times had she softened her responses, modulated her reactions, accepted partial accountability for other people's choices to mistreat her? How many times had she prioritized making powerful people comfortable over defending her own dignity? Jordan appeared at her door. Nia, there's someone here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's urgent. His name is Theodore Marsh. Nia's eyebrows rose. Theodore. Frost & Sterling's CFO, the nervous man with excellent spreadsheets who'd turned pale when she invoked Clause 8.3. What was he doing in her office? Send him in. Theodore entered looking like he hadn't slept in days. His suit was immaculate, but his face carried the gray exhaustion of someone navigating corporate catastrophe. He clutched a leather portfolio with white-knuckled intensity. Ms. Carter, thank you for seeing me. I know I have no right to ask for your time after everything. Sit down, Mr. Marsh. He sat, setting his portfolio on the edge of her desk with careful precision. I came here without authorization from Frost & Sterling's board. What I'm about to tell you could cost me my job. But I can't. I watched that interview this morning, and I can't let Evelyn's lies stand unchallenged. Nia leaned forward, her attention sharpening. I'm listening. Evelyn knew exactly what she was doing when she refused your handshake. We had a meeting the night before your visit. She expressed concerns about partnering with your firm because Theodore swallowed hard, his discomfort visible. Because she didn't believe our clients would be comfortable working with a black-owned firm. She used different language, more coded, but the meaning was clear. Several of us objected. I specifically said that we needed your capital and that your firm's track record was exceptional. She overruled us. Theodore opened his portfolio and extracted several documents. These are internal communications from the weeks leading up to your meeting. Evelyn questioned whether you had the right background to understand our clientele. She expressed concerns about cultural compatibility. She made it clear she viewed the partnership as a last resort. He slid the documents across the desk. Nia picked them up and read through them slowly. Emails and memos that painted a clear picture of Evelyn's resistance to partnering with Carter Capital Management, laden with exactly the kind of coded language that communicated discrimination without explicitly stating it. Why are you showing me this? Nia asked quietly. Because this morning, Evelyn went on television and lied. She claimed your negotiation tactics were the problem, that her comment about people like you referred to aggressive business practices. That's false. She refused your handshake because of who you are, not how you negotiate. And the 800 employees she's suddenly so concerned about? She never mentioned them when she was sabotaging this deal based on her personal prejudices. Theodore's voice carried an edge of anger now. I've worked at Frost & Sterling for 19 years. I've watched Evelyn make decisions based on ego and bias while claiming to honor our firm's legacy. Your capital would have saved us. She threw it away because she couldn't stomach partnering with someone she considered beneath her. And now she's playing victim while our employees face layoffs. Nia studied him carefully. What do you want from me, Mr. Marsh? Nothing. I don't want you to change your decision. I don't want you to feel guilty. I just wanted you to know that what happened in that boardroom wasn't a misunderstanding. It was exactly what it looked like. And some of us saw it, and we're ashamed that we didn't do more to stop it. He stood, leaving the documents on her desk. Those are copies. Do with them what you think is appropriate. I'm prepared to testify to their authenticity if needed. You'll lose your job. Probably. But I'll be able to look at myself in the mirror. That's worth more than I thought it was. After Theodore left, Nia sat alone with the documents spread before her, like evidence in a trial she hadn't realized she was still fighting. The communications were damning, clear proof that Evelyn's refusal was premeditated discrimination, not a spontaneous reaction to negotiation tactics. With this evidence, Naya could destroy what remained of Evelyn's reputation, could prove definitively that she'd been right to invoke Clause 8. 3. Could silence every voice questioning whether her response was proportionate. She could win completely. The question was whether winning required her to keep fighting, or whether she'd already proven everything that mattered. Marcus appeared at her door, took one look at the documents, and whistled low. Where did those come from? Theodore Marsh, Frost & Sterling's CFO. He brought them without authorization. Marcus picked up the top memo and read it, his expression darkening. Nia, this is ammunition. This proves Evelyn lied in that interview. We could release these and completely dismantle her credibility. We could, but you're not sure you want to. Nia stood and walked to her windows, looking out at the city that had been backdrop to her entire career. How many battles had she fought in those buildings? How many times had she proven herself in rooms that didn't want her there? How many victories had she earned that somehow still felt incomplete because the underlying conditions that necessitated fighting remained unchanged? If I release those documents, Naya said slowly, Evelyn Frost gets destroyed even more thoroughly than she already has. Her reputation becomes permanently toxic, her career ends in disgrace, and I become the woman who not only crashed a century-old firm, but then salted the earth to make sure nothing could grow again. You'd also become the woman who proved that discrimination has real consequences, Marcus countered. You'd set a precedent that might make the next Evelyn Frost think twice before treating someone the way you were treated. Or I'd become a cautionary tale about what happens when you give power to people who can't handle it gracefully. Vindictive, excessive, unable to accept victory without humiliation. That's not fair. Fair doesn't matter in narratives, Marcus. You know that. What matters is what story people want to believe. Her phone buzzed with a text from Simone. CNN just reported that 3 Frost & Sterling board members resigned this morning. Stock down another 12%. Trading might be halted. Nia showed the message to Marcus. It's already in freefall. Releasing these documents doesn't change the outcome. It just adds cruelty to inevitability. So what are you going to do with them? Nia looked at the documents one more time. Evidence of everything she'd suspected, proof of everything she'd experienced, validation she shouldn't have needed, but that still felt significant to possess. I'm going to file them with our legal records as evidence supporting our Clause 8.3 invocation. If Frost & Sterling sues us, which they probably will, we'll use them in court. But I'm not releasing them publicly. Evelyn destroyed herself. I don't need to dance on the rubble. Marcus nodded slowly. That's probably the right call. Also probably the harder call. The right thing usually is. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of activity, conference calls with clients who wanted reassurance that Carter Capital Management remained stable, legal strategy sessions about anticipated lawsuits, media monitoring that showed the story continuing to evolve across every major outlet. Through it all, Nia maintained the same composed professionalism that had defined her career, answering questions with precision and declining to be drawn into emotional reactions. But privately, in the quiet moments between meetings, she felt the weight of what she'd set in motion. 800 Frost & Sterling employees facing uncertainty, shareholders who'd lost significant value, a century-old institution whose survival now hung in doubt. All of it traceable back to her decision to invoke Clause 8. 3. To enforce consequences rather than accept humiliation quietly. She didn't regret her choice, but she felt the gravity of it settling into her bones like sediment after a flood. At 2:37 p.m., Jordan knocked urgently on her door. Nia, you need to see this, now. Jordan pulled up a video on the tablet, footage from Frost & Sterling's headquarters showing employees walking out of the building mid-afternoon, carrying boxes. Not a few people, dozens, streaming out like an exodus. What am I looking at? Naya asked. Mass resignation. According to initial reports, over 40 employees have quit in the last 2 hours. Junior analysts, associate VPs, even some senior executives. They're posting on LinkedIn that they refuse to work for a firm whose leadership demonstrated such clear discrimination. Nia watched the footage, stunned. These weren't people she knew, weren't even people she'd ever met. But they were walking away from their jobs, from stability and paychecks and career progression, because they'd watched that video and decided they couldn't be complicit in the culture it represented. One of the departing employees paused to speak with reporters clustered outside. "I've worked here for 6 years," the young woman said, her voice steady despite visible emotion. "I stayed because I believed in the firm's legacy. But after watching Mrs. Frost refuse to shake Nia Carter's hand, after hearing her lie about what that meant, I realized the legacy I believed in doesn't actually exist. I can't build my career at a place that treats people like Ms. Carter was treated." Another employee, an older man with gray hair, added his perspective. "Some of us have been watching Evelyn's leadership erode this firm's principles for years. Ms. Carter's withdrawal didn't destroy Frost and Sterling. It revealed what was already true, that we'd lost our way. I'd rather start over somewhere else than pretend that what happened in that boardroom was acceptable." Nia felt something shift in her chest. Not vindication exactly, but a strange kind of solidarity with people she'd never met, who'd nonetheless stood up in a way that mattered more than statements or interviews ever could. "There's more," Jordan said quietly. 5 major clients have announced they're pulling their portfolios from Frost and Sterling, combined assets of over $800 million. They've issued statements citing concerns about the firm's values and leadership. The phone rang. David Morrison's direct line. "Nia, I'm pulling my portfolio from Frost and Sterling, $120 million. I'm moving it to Carter Capital Management, if you'll have it." "David, you don't need to—" "Yes, I do. I've tolerated Evelyn Frost's arrogance for years because inertia is easier than change. But watching her refuse your hand and then lie about it, I can't support that. And more importantly, I don't want to. You stood up for principle. The least I can do is put my capital where my convictions are." Throughout the afternoon, the calls continued. Clients leaving Frost and Sterling, some moving to Carter Capital, others to different firms, all of them citing the same reasoning. They'd seen the footage, watched Evelyn's interview, and decided they couldn't continue relationships with an institution whose leadership had revealed itself so clearly. By 5 p.m., Frost and Sterling had lost over $1.2 billion in client assets, on top of the initial $2.4 billion Nia had withdrawn. The stock had been halted for trading. Emergency board meetings were being called. And through it all, Evelyn Frost remained silent, her morning interview suddenly seeming like a tactical catastrophe rather than damage control. Nia stood at her windows watching the sun descend toward the Hudson, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose that seemed too beautiful for a day that had been this complicated. Her phone continued buzzing with updates, messages, news alerts tracking the ongoing collapse of an institution that had seemed permanent just 48 hours ago. Simone entered quietly, carrying 2 cups of tea she somehow knew Nia needed. "I've been doing this work for 23 years, Simone said, handing Nia a cup. "Crisis management, reputation defense, narrative control. I've seen scandals and downfalls and corporate catastrophes, but I've never seen anything quite like this." "What do you mean?" "Usually, when powerful institutions fall, they're brought down by external forces. Market crashes, regulatory action, investigative journalism. But Frost and Sterling is being destroyed by something more fundamental. People watching that footage and deciding they don't want to be associated with what it represents. That's not a crisis you can manage with press releases. That's a moral reckoning." Nia sipped her tea, letting the warmth spread through her hands. "I didn't want this, Simone. I wanted a partnership. I wanted to build something valuable together. All I asked for was basic respect." "I know, and that's why this matters. You didn't destroy Frost and Sterling, Nia. Evelyn did, the moment she decided her prejudices were more important than her responsibilities. You just made the destruction visible." They stood together in silence as the city lights began to illuminate, thousands of windows glowing like embers in the gathering dusk. Somewhere in this vast urban landscape, Evelyn Frost was probably having her own terrible evening, watching her empire disintegrate in real time, realizing that 5 words spoken with casual cruelty had cost her everything she'd spent her life building. Nia felt no satisfaction in that thought, just a bone-deep exhaustion that came from fighting battles she'd never wanted, winning victories that felt pyrrhic, and standing alone at windows wondering what happened next. Her phone buzzed one more time. A text from her mother. "Come home this weekend. I'm making your favorite dinner, and you need to be somewhere that people love you unconditionally for a while. Nia smiled despite everything and typed back, I'll be there. Because at the end of days like this, days that redefined careers and toppled empires and forced reckonings with uncomfortable truths, what mattered most was remembering that her worth had never depended on other people's recognition of it. She'd known that before Evelyn's refusal, and she knew it still, even as the world watched and judged and drew conclusions that might or might not align with reality. Tomorrow would bring more battles, more lawsuits and interviews and public dissection, more people questioning whether she'd been right or wrong, proportionate or excessive, principled or vindictive. But tonight, Nia allowed herself to simply exist in the complicated truth of what she'd done, enforce standards that shouldn't have needed enforcing, demanded respect that should have been freely given, and refused to make herself smaller to accommodate other people's comfort with inequality. The city glittered below her windows, indifferent and eternal, and Nia Carter stood within it, not victorious exactly, but unbroken, which was perhaps the truest form of winning that existed. The weekend at her mother's house in Philadelphia should have provided sanctuary, but Nia found herself unable to fully disconnect from the storm she'd left brewing in Manhattan. She sat at the kitchen table where she'd done homework as a teenager, where she'd studied for the SATs that would eventually carry her to Yale, where she'd made the decision to start Carter Capital Management with nothing but conviction and a laptop. Her mother moved around the kitchen with the practiced efficiency of someone who believed that food could heal most wounds, preparing the promised dinner while offering the kind of companionable silence that only family could provide. "You keep checking your phone," her mother observed without looking up from the collard greens she was washing. "That thing is going to wear out from your staring at it." "I'm just monitoring the situation," Nia said, setting the phone face down on the table as if that would somehow reduce its gravitational pull. "The situation is going to continue happening whether you watch it or not. Pot roast doesn't care about stock markets, and neither should you for the next 2 hours." Nia smiled despite herself. "Mom, I crashed a 100-year-old financial institution. I don't think I can just ignore the aftermath." Her mother finally looked up, her expression carrying that particular blend of love and exasperation that had defined Nia's entire childhood. "Baby, you didn't crash anything. That woman crashed her own company the minute she decided being nasty was more important than being smart. You just refused to help her keep pretending everything was fine. Tell that to the 800 employees who might lose their jobs. Those 800 employees worked for a woman who was willing to sink their company rather than treat you with basic respect. That's on her, not on you." Her mother's voice softened. "Nia, I know you're carrying this. I know you feel responsible for consequences that aren't yours to own. But you need to hear something clearly. You did nothing wrong. You asked for dignity. When you didn't get it, you left. That's not destruction. That's self-respect." Nia felt something loosen in her chest, some knot of guilt she'd been carrying since the moment she invoked Clause 8.3. Her mother was right, and yet the weight of collateral damage still pressed against her ribs like physical force. Her phone buzzed against the table. She ignored it. It buzzed again and again. "Oh, for heaven's sake," her mother said. "Just look at it before it vibrates itself off the table." The messages were all from Marcus, each one more urgent than the last. "Nia, major development. Call me immediately. Frost & Sterling filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection an hour ago. News is breaking everywhere. You need to see this." Nia's hands went cold. Bankruptcy. The word carried a finality that even the stock collapse and mass resignations hadn't quite achieved. This was the legal acknowledgement that Frost & Sterling couldn't meet its obligations, that the firm her withdrawal had destabilized was now seeking court protection from its creditors. She called Marcus, stepping into her mother's living room for privacy. "Tell me everything," she said without preamble. "They filed at 4:47 p.m. today. Chapter 11 citing inability to meet debt obligations following the withdrawal of committed capital and subsequent client defections. The filing lists total liabilities of $3.2 billion against assets of $2.1 billion. They're underwater by over $1 billion." Nia sank into her mother's couch, the same couch she'd sat on as a child watching Saturday morning cartoons, back when the world seemed simpler and justice felt straightforward. "What does this mean operationally?" It means they're seeking court supervision to restructure their debts. Likely outcome is that they'll be forced to sell to a larger institution. Maybe one of the big investment banks will acquire them at a steep discount. The Frost family will lose control. Employees will face layoffs during restructuring. It's essentially the end of Frost and Sterling as an independent entity. And the narrative? Marcus was quiet for a moment. The narrative is that your withdrawal triggered a cascade that resulted in bankruptcy. Some outlets are calling you a hero who exposed a corrupt institution. Others are calling you the architect of an unnecessary corporate execution. It's complicated. Of course it is. After hanging up, Nia sat in the gathering darkness of her mother's living room, surrounded by family photographs that documented her journey from gap-toothed elementary school student to Yale graduate to CEO of a firm that now managed $17 billion. In every photograph, she saw the same essential person, someone who believed that working hard and doing right would eventually be enough, that excellence would transcend barriers, that the world bent toward fairness if you just pushed hard enough. Frost and Sterling's bankruptcy was forcing her to reckon with a more complicated truth, that sometimes doing the right thing still resulted in outcomes that felt heavy and painful and ambiguous, that standing up for yourself could create ripples that became waves that became tsunamis, that justice didn't arrive clean and uncomplicated, but messy and morally complex. Her mother appeared in the doorway. "Dinner's ready, and before you say you're not hungry, you need to eat anyway." They sat together at the kitchen table, and Nia went through the motions of normal conversation, asking about church gossip, hearing about her aunt's new boyfriend, discussing her cousin's college applications. The rhythms of ordinary life continued despite extraordinary circumstances, and there was something grounding about that constancy. "Your grandmother would have been proud of you," her mother said suddenly, in the middle of a story about the neighbor's new puppy. Nia looked up, surprised by the shift. "Grandma?" She spent 40 years cleaning offices in buildings where she wasn't allowed to use the front entrance, worked overnight shifts so nobody had to see her during business hours, raised 4 children on wages that should have been twice what they paid her. She never complained, never made a scene, just kept her head down and did the work. Her mother's eyes were distant, focused on memories Nia had only heard about secondhand. "But you know what she told me before she died? She said, I kept my head down so my grandbabies wouldn't have to. She said she took the disrespect so that you could demand better. That was her sacrifice, accepting what she had to accept so the next generation could refuse." Nia felt tears threatening and blinked them back. "I'm not sure she'd be proud of me destroying a company." "You didn't destroy a company, you refused to save one that didn't deserve saving. There's a difference." Her mother reached across the table and took Nia's hand. "Your grandmother kept her head down. You kept your head up. That's progress, baby. That's what all her sacrifice was for." They finished dinner in comfortable silence, and afterward Nia helped with dishes the way she had as a teenager, falling into old patterns that felt soothing in their familiarity. Her phone continued buzzing periodically, but she left it in the living room, allowing herself this brief respite from being the main character in a national story. Later that evening, alone in her childhood bedroom that her mother had preserved like a museum to her younger self, Nia finally allowed herself to read through the accumulated messages. The bankruptcy had dominated the news cycle, with every major outlet running analysis pieces about what it meant for the financial industry, for corporate accountability, for the broader conversation about discrimination in professional spaces. But buried among the news alerts and interview requests was an email that made her pause. The sender was listed as Frost and Sterling Employees Coalition, and the subject line read simply, "Thank you." She opened it hesitantly. "Ms. Carter, we are a group of 47 current and former Frost and Sterling employees who want you to know something that's not making it into the news coverage. Many of us have watched Evelyn Frost create a toxic culture for years, dismissing talented people who didn't fit her narrow vision, making decisions based on ego rather than sound business judgment, cultivating an environment where discrimination was tolerated as long as it remained unspoken. We stayed because we needed our jobs, because we hoped things would change, because leaving felt like admitting defeat. Your refusal to accept that treatment, your willingness to enforce consequences, gave us permission to do the same. The mass resignation wasn't about you destroying the firm. It was about us finally having the courage to leave something that was already broken. Whatever happens next, we want you to know that you didn't take away our jobs. You revealed that the jobs we had weren't worth keeping. That matters more than you might realize. The email was signed by dozens of names, each one representing a person who'd made a choice that would reshape their career trajectory, who decided that principle mattered more than the illusion of stability. Nia read it 3 times, feeling something shift in her understanding of what had happened. She'd been so focused on the weight of causing collapse that she hadn't fully absorbed the meaning of people choosing to walk away. They hadn't been casualties of her decision. They'd been catalyzed by it, empowered to make choices they'd been postponing. She fell asleep that night with her phone finally silenced, the weight of responsibility still present but somehow more bearable, wrapped in the knowledge that her grandmother had kept her head down so Nia could keep hers up. Sunday morning arrived with church bells from the Baptist church 3 blocks away, the same bells that had marked time throughout her childhood. Her mother was already awake, dressed for service, expecting Nia to attend the way she had every Sunday she'd spent under this roof. "I'm not sure I'm up for church today, Mom," Nia said over coffee. "Good thing nobody asked if you were up for it. We're going." There was no arguing with that tone, so Nia dressed in a conservative navy dress and accompanied her mother to Bethel AMA, the church where 4 generations of her family had celebrated and mourned and sought guidance. The congregation greeted her with the warm familiarity of people who'd known her since she was 6 years old, people who'd watched her grow up and move away, and become someone they saw on the news, but who would always be Sister Carter's daughter in this space. Pastor Williams, a man who'd officiated her grandmother's funeral and had probably baptized half the congregation, built his sermon around a passage from Esther, the story of a woman who risked everything by speaking truth to power, who chose possible death over complicit silence. He didn't mention Nia by name, but his eyes found hers several times during the sermon, and the congregation's amens carried a particular intensity. "Sometimes," Pastor Williams said, his voice filling the sanctuary with the cadence of generations of preachers, "doing the right thing doesn't feel righteous. Sometimes it feels heavy. Sometimes it feels like you've caused more problems than you've solved. But that's because we're conditioned to measure righteousness by comfort, to evaluate justice by whether it disrupts the status quo. Real righteousness often looks like disruption. Real justice often feels uncomfortable. The question isn't whether standing up creates consequences. The question is whether those consequences reveal truth that needed revealing." After the service, members of the congregation approached Nia with words of support that felt different from the professional solidarity she'd received from colleagues. These were people who understood struggle at a cellular level, who'd navigated discrimination in forms both subtle and overt, who recognized what it cost to stand up when keeping your head down was safer. Mrs. Henderson, a retired teacher who'd known Nia's grandmother, gripped her hand with surprising strength. "Your grandma used to tell me about the things she endured at those offices she cleaned. The disrespect, the casual cruelty, the way people treated her like she was invisible. She bore it because she had to. You didn't have to, and you chose not to. That's what progress looks like, child. That's what she worked for." The drive back to New York Sunday evening felt like transitioning between worlds, from the protective cocoon of family and community back to the exposed stage of public scrutiny. Nia merged onto I-95 as the sun descended behind her, painting Philadelphia in shades of gold that felt like benediction. Her phone, which she'd kept mostly silenced all weekend, exploded with notifications the moment she crossed into New Jersey. The bankruptcy story had continued evolving in her absence. Legal analysts were debating the precedent her case might set. Business schools were apparently already incorporating the Frost and Sterling collapse into case studies about contract law and corporate ethics. And somewhere in the midst of all the analysis and commentary, Evelyn Frost had given another interview. Nia pulled into a rest stop and pulled up the video, watching as Evelyn appeared on camera, looking diminished in a way that went beyond professional setback. She'd aged visibly in the past week, the sharp confidence replaced by something more brittle. "I want to address the employees who've lost their positions," Evelyn said, her voice carrying emotion that might have been genuine. "I take full responsibility for the decisions that led to this outcome. Ms. Carter was right that the firm was over-leveraged. She was right that we needed her capital, and She paused, seeming to gather herself. "I allowed personal judgment to interfere with business necessity. That was wrong. The consequences of my choices are mine to bear, not theirs. The interviewer pressed, "Are you acknowledging that your treatment of Ms. Carter was discriminatory?" Evelyn's pause stretched long enough to be uncomfortable. "I'm acknowledging that my behavior was unprofessional and inappropriate. Whether it rose to the legal definition of discrimination is a question I'll leave to others. But I can say that Ms. Carter deserved better treatment than I gave her, and the employees of Frost & Sterling deserved better leadership than I provided." It wasn't quite an apology, wasn't quite an admission, but it was closer to accountability than Nia had expected. She watched the rest of the interview with complicated feelings. No satisfaction in Evelyn's obvious distress, no vindication in her careful half-admissions, just a weary recognition that this was how these stories usually ended. Not with clear villains vanquished and heroes triumphant, but with messy partial acknowledgments and consequences that rippled out in all directions. Nia arrived back at her apartment near midnight, exhausted from the drive and the emotional weight of the weekend. She fell into bed planning to sleep immediately, but her mind refused to quiet. Tomorrow she'd return to Carter Capital Management and face whatever came next, the lawsuits that would certainly be filed, the clients who'd need reassurance, the employees who'd want guidance about how to navigate working for a firm that had become unexpectedly famous. Her phone buzzed one final time. A text from David Morrison, sent at an hour that suggested he was also struggling to sleep. "Nia, I've been thinking about what you said in our first call after the incident, about how you came to that meeting prepared to partner with an institution you respected. I want you to know that a group of us are discussing forming a new investment consortium, properly capitalized, properly led, properly valued. We'd like you to consider being the founding CEO, not as compensation for what happened, but because we want to invest in leadership that actually embodies the principles Frost & Sterling only pretended to honor. No pressure, just something to think about." Nia stared at the message for a long moment. An opportunity to build something new from the rubble of what had collapsed, to transform this moment of disruption into something constructive. It was appealing in a way that surprised her, not because she wanted to replace Frost & Sterling, but because she recognized the rare chance to create an institution designed from the beginning around principles that too often got added as afterthoughts. She typed back, "Let's talk this week." Sleep finally came, and with it dreams that were less fraught than the previous nights. Visions of buildings rising rather than falling, of foundations being laid stone by careful stone, of structures built to last because they were designed with integrity from the start. Monday morning arrived with the familiar anxiety of returning to public life. But Nia found herself steadier than she'd been the previous week. She dressed in a charcoal suit, chose her grandmother's pearl earrings for courage, and arrived at Carter Capital Management ready to face whatever the day demanded. The office felt different somehow, not just because of the national attention focused on their firm, but because of the way her team moved through the space with a particular pride. They'd stood by her through the storm. They'd executed her strategy flawlessly. They'd demonstrated that Carter Capital Management was built on more than just Nia's leadership. It was sustained by people who shared her values. Jordan appeared at her office door at 8:30 a.m. with coffee and an expression that meant news was coming. "3 things you need to know," Jordan said, settling into the chair across from Nia's desk. "First, we received 14 new client inquiries over the weekend, combined assets of approximately $400 million. They specifically mentioned the Frost & Sterling situation as their reason for reaching out. Second, the SEC has formally closed their investigation into the Clause 8.3 invocation. They found no impropriety in how you executed the withdrawal. Third, Frost & Sterling's bankruptcy trustee has requested a meeting with you." Nia processed this information, separating the threads of opportunity, validation, and complication. What does the trustee want? They didn't specify, but Marcus thinks they're going to propose some kind of settlement. Maybe they want you to reduce the liquidation claim in exchange for, I don't know, something. Marcus says you should hear them out, but that you're under no obligation to negotiate. Set up the meeting for later this week. I want Marcus present, and I want a clear understanding of their position before I commit to anything. The day progressed through a series of meetings and calls that felt both routine and historically weighted. Client conversations that acknowledged the Frost & Sterling situation, but focused primarily on performance and strategy. team debriefs about new business development and existing portfolio management. The ordinary work of running an investment firm that was somehow now also the extraordinary work of leading an organization that had become a symbol of something larger than itself. At 3 p.m., Simone knocked on Nia's door with unusual hesitance. "There's someone downstairs asking to see you. No appointment. I would have sent her away, but, well, you should probably know who it is." "Who?" "Evelyn Frost." The name landed like a stone dropped into still water. Nia felt the ripples spread through her body. Surprise, wariness, curiosity, and underneath it all a thread of something that might have been compassion. "She's here? In our building?" "Waiting in the lobby. Security called up before letting her onto the elevators. I can tell them to send her away if you want." Nia considered this. Every strategic bone in her body suggested refusing the meeting, avoiding any conversation that might be misconstrued or weaponized, maintaining the clear boundaries she'd established. But another part of her, the part shaped by her grandmother's resilience and her mother's wisdom and Pastor William's sermon about righteousness and disruption, recognized that sometimes closure required facing uncomfortable conversations. "Send her up, but make sure Marcus is available if I need him." 5 minutes later, Evelyn Frost entered Nia's office looking like a person who'd traveled a great distance to arrive at a destination she'd never wanted to reach. Her silver hair was still perfectly styled, her suit still impeccably tailored, but something fundamental had shifted in her bearing. The absolute certainty was gone, replaced by something more human and more fragile. "Miss Carter, thank you for seeing me. I know I have no right to ask for your time." "Sit down, Mrs. Frost." They faced each other across Nia's desk, and for a moment neither spoke. Outside the windows, the city continued its relentless motion. Construction cranes swinging loads, traffic flowing through intersections, millions of people pursuing their own complicated lives, indifferent to the small drama unfolding 47 floors above them. "I came here to apologize," Evelyn said finally. "Not the qualified, lawyer-vetted statement I gave in that interview. A real apology. What I did in that boardroom was inexcusable. I refused to shake your hand because I couldn't stomach the idea of partnering with someone I'd been raised to consider—" She stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. "Lesser. That prejudice is my shame, not your burden. And the employees who lost their jobs, the shareholders who lost value, the legacy that's now in bankruptcy, those consequences flow from my choices, not yours." Nia listened without interruption, watching Evelyn carefully. This was either genuine contrition or an extraordinarily skillful performance, and she wasn't entirely sure which. "I spent the weekend reading about your firm," Evelyn continued, "about how you built Carter Capital Management from nothing, about your track record, your client retention, your investment philosophy. You're exceptional at what you do. And I threw away the opportunity to partner with you because I couldn't see past my own prejudices. That's not just morally wrong, it's staggeringly stupid. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to hear it. Because those employees who resigned deserve to know that you weren't the villain in this story. You were the mirror that showed them what they'd been tolerating. And because," Evelyn's voice wavered slightly, "because I'm 61 years old, and I've spent my entire adult life believing that my family's legacy and my personal pedigree made me superior to people who'd actually earned their positions through merit. That delusion just cost me everything. The least I can do is acknowledge the truth clearly." Nia sat back in her chair, studying the woman across from her. "Mrs. Frost, I appreciate you coming here, but I'm not sure what you want from me. Absolution? Forgiveness? Reduction of the liquidation claim so the bankruptcy is less painful? I don't want anything. I came here because you extended your hand once, and I refused it. I wanted to—" Evelyn stood slowly and extended her own hand across the desk. "I wanted to offer mine, not as a negotiation, not as a legal maneuver, just as an acknowledgement of what should have happened the first time." Nia looked at the extended hand, at this woman who'd humiliated her on camera and then spent a week trying to reframe that humiliation as a misunderstanding. Every defensive instinct suggested refusing, turning the rejection back on its source, demonstrating that actions had consequences that couldn't be undone by belated gestures. But Nia had learned something in the past week that she hadn't fully understood before. Power wasn't just about enforcing consequences. It was also about choosing when to extend grace, not because the other person deserved it, but because holding on to anger required energy that could be spent building something better. She stood and shook Evelyn's hand, a firm, professional grip that lasted exactly the appropriate duration and communicated neither forgiveness nor condemnation, just acknowledgement, just closure. Thank you for coming, Mrs. Frost. I hope you find a way forward that's more aligned with the values you claim to hold. After Evelyn left, Nia stood at her windows for a long time, watching the city darken as evening approached. The handshake had been strange, neither satisfying nor unsatisfying, just necessary in a way she couldn't quite articulate. It didn't change what had happened. It didn't undo the damage or erase the public humiliation. But it marked an ending, a final punctuation on a chapter she was ready to close. Her phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. Trustee meeting scheduled for Thursday. They're proposing a settlement that would reduce your liquidation claim by 30% in exchange for a statement supporting the restructuring plan. Thoughts? Nia typed back, "We'll discuss Thursday, but my initial reaction is that we honored our contract fully. I'm not interested in reducing our legal claim to make their bankruptcy more comfortable." She gathered her things and prepared to leave for the day, exhausted by conversations and decisions and the ongoing weight of being central to a story that refused to conclude cleanly. As she rode the elevator down, she thought about David Morrison's message about forming a new investment consortium, about the opportunity to build something designed from the beginning around principles that mattered. Outside, the autumn evening had turned crisp, the kind of weather that promised winter was coming but hadn't quite arrived yet. Nia walked the 12 blocks to her apartment rather than calling her driver, needing the movement and the relative anonymity of being just another person on a Manhattan sidewalk. Her phone rang, Maya calling with the enthusiasm that suggested she had opinions to share. "Nia, I just saw the news about Evelyn coming to your office. Please tell me you made her grovel." I shook her hand and accepted her apology. "You what? Nia, after everything she did?" "Maya, she's already lost everything. Making her grovel wouldn't change anything except making me into someone I don't want to be." Her sister was quiet for a moment. "That's incredibly mature of you. Also kind of disappointing because I really wanted you to make her suffer more." Nia laughed despite herself. "She's suffering plenty. Bankruptcy, public disgrace, the complete collapse of everything she spent her life building. I don't need to add to it." "I guess. But Nia, are you okay? Really okay? Because you've been dealing with this for a week, and I know you're strong, but you don't have to be strong all the time." The question, asked with genuine concern rather than polite obligation, nearly broke through the composure Nia had been maintaining. "I'm tired, Maya. I'm proud of standing up for myself, but I'm tired of having to. I'm relieved that it's mostly over, but I'm carrying the weight of all those employees who lost jobs. I'm grateful for the support, but overwhelmed by the attention. I'm a lot of things at once." That sounds completely normal given that you just accidentally became a national figure for standing up to discrimination. "I didn't mean to become a national figure. I just wanted her to shake my hand." "I know, but sometimes standing up for the smallest piece of dignity ends up meaning something bigger than you planned. That's not your fault. That's just what happens when someone finally refuses to accept what everyone else has been accepting." They talked for another 20 minutes about nothing in particular, Maya's dating life, their mother's ongoing campaign to get Nia to visit more often, plans for Thanksgiving that was still weeks away, but that their mother was already organizing with military precision. Normal family conversation that felt grounding after days of extraordinary circumstances. Nia reached her apartment building as darkness settled fully over the city, thousands of lights illuminating in response like stars emerging. She rode the elevator to her floor, unlocked her door, and stepped into the space that had been her sanctuary throughout this storm. Tomorrow would bring more meetings, more decisions, more navigation of the aftermath. But tonight, Nia allowed herself to simply be. Not the CEO who'd crashed a century-old firm, not the symbol of resistance against discrimination, not the protagonist in a viral story. Just herself, tired and complicated and uncertain about what came next, but fundamentally unbroken by everything that had happened. She poured a glass of wine, put on music that had nothing to do with finance or justice or corporate ethics, and let herself exist in the quiet knowledge that she'd made choices she could live with. Not perfect choices, perhaps, but honest ones. Not painless consequences, but necessary ones. And as the city hummed beyond her windows, and the week finally settled into something resembling conclusion, Nia Carter understood something her grandmother had probably known all along. That keeping your head up had costs, but so did keeping it down. And at least when you stood tall, you could see clearly what you were fighting for. 3 months passed with the peculiar acceleration of time that follows watershed moments. The kind of compression where entire weeks blur together, but individual conversations remain crystalline in memory. Winter settled over New York with the brittle clarity that made the city feel both harsher and more honest, stripping away comfortable illusions the way bare trees revealed their essential architecture. Nia stood in a conference room that didn't yet feel entirely like hers, though the paperwork said otherwise. The space occupied the entire 42nd floor of a building in Hudson Yards, all glass and steel, and the kind of carefully designed openness that communicated transparency as foundational value rather than aspirational goal. Carter Morrison Capital, the name they'd settled on after weeks of negotiation, was scheduled to officially launch in 2 weeks, and the final preparations carried the anxious energy of something both exciting and terrifying. David Morrison stood beside her, reviewing the layout with the satisfied expression of someone who'd spent 40 years in finance and finally found a project that meant something beyond quarterly returns. The trading floor should be operational by Monday, he said, gesturing toward the eastern wing where workstations were being installed with meticulous precision. We've got commitments from 32 institutional clients representing $4.7 billion in initial assets. Not bad for a firm that didn't exist 90 days ago. Not bad at all, Nia agreed, though her mind was elsewhere, caught in the complexity of what they were actually building. This wasn't just another investment firm. It was a statement about what happened when you refused to accept that discrimination was simply the cost of doing business, when you insisted that principles could coexist with profit, when you built something new rather than trying to reform institutions too calcified to change. You're thinking too hard, David observed. I can see it in your face. What's worrying you? I'm wondering if we're just recreating the same problems with better intentions. How do we ensure that 10 years from now, we're not the institution that needs disrupting? David smiled, the kind of expression that suggested he'd asked himself the same question. By building accountability into the structure from the beginning, by hiring people who'll challenge us when we drift, by remembering that this firm exists because you refuse to accept being treated poorly, that origin story should keep us honest. Nia's phone buzzed with a message from Jordan. Media requests for the launch announcement. Wall Street Journal wants an exclusive. Bloomberg is offering a profile piece. How do you want to handle? She typed back, decline exclusives. Release a simple statement confirming the launch and our investment philosophy. No drama, just facts. The past 3 months had taught Nia to be strategic about media attention. The initial frenzy around Frost & Sterling's collapse had eventually subsided, replaced by the slower burn of analysis pieces and business school case studies. Nia had given exactly one interview to a financial journalist she respected who'd promised to focus on industry implications rather than personal narrative, and otherwise maintain deliberate silence, letting her work speak louder than her words. The bankruptcy proceedings had concluded with surprising speed. A consortium led by J.P. Morgan had acquired Frost & Sterling's assets for approximately 40 cents on the dollar. Most employees had been offered positions in the merged entity, though at reduced compensation and with less autonomy. Evelyn Frost had formally resigned from all professional positions and, according to industry gossip, had retreated to her house in the Hamptons where she was apparently writing a memoir that nobody was eager to publish. Nia felt neither triumph nor sympathy about these outcomes, just the quiet recognition that consequences had arrived exactly as they should have, distributed according to decisions people had made freely. Marcus appeared in the doorway of the conference room, carrying a folder that meant legal business required attention. The final settlement with Frost & Sterling's trustee came through. They agreed to full liquidation value. No reduction, no negotiation. We'll receive payment within 30 days. Good, Nia said simply. She'd refused every settlement offer that involved reducing her legal claim, refused every suggestion that she should make the bankruptcy less painful for an institution that had demonstrated such clear contempt for basic dignity. Not out of vindictiveness, but out of principle. Contracts meant something. Standards mattered. Compromising either would have undermined everything she'd stood for. "There's something else," Marcus continued. "Theodore Marsh reached out. He's asking if there might be a position here at Carter Morrison. He said he knows it's presumptuous given his association with Frost and Sterling, but he wanted to inquire." Nia considered this carefully. Theodore had brought her the documents that proved Evelyn's discrimination was premeditated, had risked his career to support truth when silence would have been easier. He'd subsequently lost his CFO position when Frost and Sterling collapsed, a consequence that felt unfair given that he'd tried to do the right thing. "Set up a meeting," Nia said. "I want to hear what he's looking for, what he learned from the experience. If he's genuinely committed to building something better, there might be a place for him here." The afternoon progressed through final preparations, approving office furniture selections, reviewing the employee handbook that Jordan had drafted with remarkable attention to creating genuine work-life balance, finalizing technology systems that would support the kind of transparent operations they'd committed to maintaining. Every decision felt weighted with the recognition that they were establishing patterns that would either strengthen or undermine their founding principles. At 4 p.m., Nia had a scheduled call with the leadership team of the Frost and Sterling Employees Coalition, the group that had written to thank her 3 months ago, many of whom had since found positions at firms that better aligned with their values. They'd asked for this conversation to discuss a proposal they'd developed, and Nia had agreed without knowing what to expect. The video call connected, showing 12 faces arranged in a grid, former analysts and associates and mid-level managers who'd all chosen to walk away from guaranteed compensation rather than remain complicit in a culture they couldn't support. Rachel Kim, who'd emerged as the informal leader of the coalition, spoke first. "Ms. Carter, thank you for making time for this. We wanted to share something we've been working on since leaving Frost and Sterling. Several of us have been developing a certification program for investment firms, essentially a voluntary standard for ethical workplace practices and anti-discrimination policies. Firms that meet the criteria could be certified, giving clients a reliable signal about their values. We're calling it the Carter Standard." Nia felt something catch in her throat. "You want to name it after me?" "We want to name it after the principle you demonstrated, that refusing to accept discrimination isn't optional or excessive. It's baseline professional conduct. The standard would include specific requirements around hiring practices, promotion transparency, harassment protocols, and accountability measures. We've been consulting with employment lawyers and ethics experts. We think it could actually change industry culture if enough firms adopt it." Another coalition member, a young man named Marcus Chen, added context. "We started developing this because we kept having the same conversation at our new jobs. People would ask why we left Frost and Sterling. We'd explain what happened, and they'd say, 'That's terrible, but what can you do?' And we realized there's a lot we can do. We can create standards that make discrimination harder to hide and easier to address. We can give clients tools to evaluate firms beyond just financial returns. We can build the infrastructure for accountability that should have existed all along." Nia listened as they outlined the certification criteria with impressive thoroughness: quantitative metrics around workforce diversity, qualitative assessment of promotion patterns, anonymous employee surveys, third-party auditing of compensation equity, transparent reporting of harassment complaints and resolutions. It was comprehensive and rigorous, and exactly the kind of systemic change that individual acts of resistance could never achieve alone. "This is remarkable work," Nia said carefully, "but I'm not sure about using my name. This should be bigger than any one person's experience." "With respect," Rachel countered, "it needs to be associated with your experience because that's what makes it real." The Carter Standard tells a story. It reminds people that standards exist because someone refused to accept less. It connects abstract principles to concrete action. That narrative power matters. They talked for another 40 minutes, discussing implementation strategies and potential partner organizations and the challenges of getting established firms to submit to voluntary certification. Nia found herself both inspired by their energy and humbled by their commitment to transforming personal experience into systemic change. "I'll support this however I can," Nia said finally. "If you want to use my name, you have my permission, and Carter Morrison Capital will be your first certified firm. We'll work with you to meet every standard you're developing, and we'll model what full transparency looks like." After the call ended, Nia sat alone in the conference room as the winter afternoon faded into early darkness. The city lights began their nightly illumination, and she watched the transformation with the strange sense of witnessing something both ordinary and profound. Somewhere in this vast urban sprawl, people were making choices about how to treat each other, about what standards to accept and what lines to defend, about whether to keep their heads down or stand up straight. Her phone rang. Her mother, calling with the impeccable timing that suggested some kind of maternal sixth sense. "Baby, I just had lunch with Mrs. Henderson and she told me that her grandson applied for a position at your new firm. She's so proud she can barely contain herself. Says you're giving young people hope that doing the right thing doesn't mean sacrificing success." "Mom, we haven't even officially launched yet. I don't know if this is going to work long term." "Of course it's going to work. You built it on the right foundation. That matters more than you think." Her mother paused, and Nia could hear the familiar sounds of her childhood home in the background. The clock that had hung in the hallway for 30 years, the creak of the floorboard near the kitchen. "Your grandmother would be so proud, Nia, not just of what you accomplished, but of how you did it, with your dignity intact." They talked for a while about smaller things, family gossip and holiday plans, and her mother's ongoing campaign to convince Nia to take a real vacation, before saying goodbye with the comfortable knowledge that they'd talk again soon. As evening settled completely, Nia gathered her things and prepared to leave the office that would soon be operational, buzzing with the energy of people who'd chosen to build something meaningful together. She rode the elevator down and emerged into the winter night, cold enough that her breath misted in the air. Instead of heading directly home, Nia found herself walking toward the Hudson River, toward the observation area where the city opened up to water and sky. She needed space to think, to process the distance between where she'd been 3 months ago and where she stood now. The observation deck was nearly empty, just a few other people brave enough to face the cold for the view. Nia stood at the railing and looked out at the river, at the lights reflecting on dark water, at the vastness that put individual human dramas into humbling perspective. Her phone buzzed with a final message of the day. Simone, sending a link to an article that had just been published. The headline read, "3 months after viral handshake refusal, Nia Carter builds something better." The article was thorough and surprisingly insightful, tracing not just the Frost and Sterling collapse, but the ecosystem of change that had emerged in its wake. The Employees Coalition and their certification program. The increased scrutiny of workplace discrimination in finance. The firms that had quietly revised their hiring and promotion practices after watching the public response to Evelyn's refusal. The younger generation of professionals who'd cited the incident as motivation to demand better treatment from their employers. The piece concluded with a quote from an unnamed industry veteran. What Nia Carter did wasn't destroy a firm. She revealed that the firm had already destroyed itself through culture and choices that couldn't survive exposure to daylight. That revelation was uncomfortable, but it was necessary. And what she's building now suggests that discomfort can be productive if it leads to genuine change. Nia read the article twice, then put her phone away and simply stood in the cold evening, feeling the weight and lightness of these past months settling into something like understanding. She hadn't set out to become a symbol, or to catalyze an industry reckoning, or to build a new kind of firm. She just wanted someone to shake her hand, to treat her with the basic respect that every professional deserved regardless of background or identity. The cascade of consequences that followed wasn't something she'd engineered. It was simply what happened when you refuse to accept mistreatment in a system designed to make acceptance easier than resistance. The wind off the Hudson cut through her coat, and Nia finally turned away from the water, heading back toward the warmth of the city and the apartment that waited for her. Tomorrow would bring more preparation for the launch, more decisions about hiring and strategy and positioning. Next week would bring the official announcement and the inevitable media attention and the challenge of proving that their principles could coexist with sustainable success. But tonight, Nia allowed herself to feel something close to peace. Not because everything had been resolved cleanly or because justice had arrived without collateral damage, but because she'd made choices she could defend, enforced standards that mattered, and refused to compromise her dignity for other people's comfort. The launch day for Carter Morrison Capital arrived with the crisp brightness of early February, the kind of morning where everything felt sharp-edged and possible. Naya arrived at the office at 6 a.m. to find that half her team had beaten her there, everyone moving through final preparations with the focused energy of people who understood they were participating in something meaningful. Jordan had arranged the day with characteristic precision, a morning press conference to announce the launch, followed by individual meetings with key clients, concluding with an evening reception for employees and partners and supporters who'd helped build this venture from concept to reality. No excessive ceremony, no dramatic unveiling, just professional execution of a carefully planned beginning. At 9 a.m., Naya stood before a room of financial journalists and industry analysts, flanked by David Morrison and the other founding partners who'd committed capital and credibility to this endeavor. She'd prepared brief remarks that Marcus had reviewed for legal precision and Simone had refined for messaging clarity, but standing there facing cameras and expectant faces, Nia found herself speaking more from instinct than from notes. 3 months ago, I walked out of a meeting where I'd been treated with contempt. I enforced contractual consequences for that mistreatment, and those consequences rippled out in ways that were both necessary and painful. Some people called my response excessive. Others called it overdue. What matters to me is that it was honest, an honest refusal to accept that discrimination is just the cost of doing business in this industry. She paused, looking out at the assembled journalists who'd spent months analyzing every aspect of her decision and its aftermath. Carter Morrison Capital exists because a group of investors decided they wanted to put their resources into a firm built from the beginning around principles of respect, transparency, and accountability. We're not claiming to be perfect. We're not pretending that good intentions automatically translate into good outcomes. But we are committing publicly to standards that many firms treat as optional. We're building accountability into our structure, and we're demonstrating that you can be both principled and profitable, both ethical and effective. The questions that followed were sharp and skeptical in exactly the ways she'd expected. How would they ensure their ideals survived market pressures? What made them think they could succeed where established firms had failed? Wasn't this just good marketing dressed up as moral leadership? Nia answered each question with the same fundamental message. They would maintain their principles because they'd hired people who shared those values, because they'd built oversight mechanisms that made deviation difficult, and because they understood that trust was an asset worth protecting even when doing so was inconvenient. The easiest thing in the world, Nia said in response to a particularly pointed question about market competition, is to compromise your standards when maintaining them gets uncomfortable. We've seen that play out across this industry for decades. What we're proposing is harder but more sustainable, that you build trust by actually being trustworthy, that you attract talent by treating people well, that you serve clients by operating with genuine transparency. If that approach doesn't work, then we'll fail. But we'll fail having tried something worth attempting. The press conference concluded, and the day accelerated into the blur of activity that characterized major launches. Client meetings where Nia walked through their investment philosophy and operational structure. Media interviews that she'd finally agreed to because silence was no longer serving her goals. Calls with regulators confirming their compliance with every relevant requirement. The relentless machinery of establishing credibility in an industry that rewarded track records over promises. By evening, when the reception began, Nia felt the particular exhaustion that comes from being constantly observed and evaluated. She stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows of their office space, watching employees and clients and partners mingle with the easy conversation of people who'd chosen to be part of something they believed in. Theodore Marsh approached with champagne and a tentative smile. She'd hired him 2 weeks earlier as their chief operating officer after several conversations that convinced her he'd genuinely learned from the Frost & Sterling collapse and was committed to building something better. "This is really happening," Theodore said, looking out at the gathering. 6 months ago, I was CFO of a firm that seemed permanent and untouchable. Now I'm helping launch something new with the woman my former boss refused to shake hands with. Life is strange. Strange and occasionally just, Nia agreed. You took a real risk bringing me those documents. I hope this position feels like adequate compensation for that courage. It feels like a second chance to get things right. That's worth more than compensation. Theodore paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. I wanted to tell you something I haven't said publicly. When Evelyn refused your handshake, I felt relieved. Not because I agreed with her, I was horrified, but because I thought, at least this isn't my problem to solve. I didn't object in the moment. I didn't stand up. I let you face that alone because intervening felt risky and uncomfortable. He looked at her directly, his expression carrying genuine remorse. I've thought about that silence every day since, about how many times I stayed quiet when I should have spoken, how many small cruelties I witnessed and rationalized as someone else's battle to fight. Working here is my way of trying to be the person I should have been in that boardroom. Nia felt unexpected emotion tighten her throat. Theodore, what you did afterward, bringing those documents, testifying to the truth, that mattered. Not everyone who witnesses discrimination finds the courage to eventually stand up. But eventually isn't enough. It should have been immediately. That's what I'm trying to learn. They stood together in companionable silence, watching the party unfold with the recognition that this beginning was built on lessons learned from painful endings. Rachel Kim from the Employees Coalition approached with several of her colleagues, all of them carrying themselves with the confidence of people who'd transformed trauma into purpose. Ms. Carter, we wanted to give you this before the night ends. Rachel handed her a leather portfolio embossed with simple text, the Carter Standard, Certification Criteria, version 1.0. Nia opened it to find a comprehensive framework for evaluating firms on workplace equity, discrimination prevention, and accountability mechanisms. It was rigorous and detailed and represented hundreds of hours of work from people who could have simply moved on to new jobs and forgotten about systemic change. We're launching the certification program next month, Rachel explained. We've already got interest from 15 firms who want to participate. It's not mandatory, obviously, but we're hoping that client pressure will make certification increasingly valuable. Firms that achieve it can advertise themselves as Carter Standard certified. Firms that don't, well, clients can draw their own conclusions. This is extraordinary, Nia said, meaning it completely. You've created infrastructure for accountability that should have existed decades ago. We created it because you showed us that individual resistance can spark collective action. One person refusing to accept mistreatment doesn't change systems. But one person's refusal can inspire others to demand change, and that collective demand that actually moves mountains. As the evening progressed, Nia found herself in conversation after conversation with people whose lives had been touched by that moment in Frost & Sterling's boardroom. Former employees who'd found better positions, clients who'd moved their portfolios to firms with better values, young professionals who'd cited the incident as motivation to enter finance with commitment to changing its culture. Each conversation reinforced the same truth, that standing up had ripple effects impossible to predict or control, but those effects could be productive if they inspired others to make better choices. Near midnight, as the party wound down and the last guest departed, Nia stood alone in the office that was now operational and real, surrounded by evidence that resistance could be more than symbolic. The trading floor would open Monday morning with 32 institutional clients and $4.7 billion in assets under management. The Carter Standard would launch its certification program in 6 weeks. Firms across the industry had revised their policies and procedures in response to the scrutiny her case had generated. None of it brought back the employees who'd lost jobs at Frost & Sterling. None of it erased the pain of that initial humiliation or the complicated months that followed. But it transformed that pain into something constructive, converted individual trauma into systemic pressure for change. Her phone buzzed with a final message. Maya, sending a photo of herself holding a newspaper with the headline, Carter Morrison Capital Launches with Principled Vision. Her sister had drawn a crown on Nia's head in the accompanying photo and written, Queen of Refusing to Accept BS. So proud of you. Nia smiled and typed back, Thanks for always believing this was worth fighting for. She gathered her things and took a final look around the office before heading home. The trading floor with its state-of-the-art equipment, the conference rooms designed for transparency, the employee spaces that prioritized humanity alongside productivity. All of it represented a bet that you could build something profitable and principled simultaneously, that you didn't have to choose between success and integrity. The elevator descended smoothly, and Naya emerged into the February night that had turned cold and clear, the kind of weather where stars were actually visible above Manhattan's light pollution. She walked the several blocks to her apartment with her head up, her shoulders straight, carrying herself with the dignity that had been her inheritance from a grandmother who'd kept her head down so that Nia could keep hers up. The world hadn't transformed completely in 3 months. Discrimination still existed in finance and every other industry. People still faced choices between accepting mistreatment and risking consequences. Systems still favored those who'd always been favored and resisted those who challenged existing hierarchies. But something had shifted, some small recalibration in what was considered acceptable and what was recognized as inexcusable. Evelyn Frost's refusal to shake hands had seemed like a moment of personal cruelty. The response it generated had revealed it as a fracture point in a system that had tolerated too much for too long. Nia reached her building and rode the elevator to her floor, unlocked her door, and stepped into the quiet sanctuary of home. She poured herself a glass of wine she'd been saving for this exact occasion, a 2015 Bordeaux that her mentor had given her years ago, with instructions to open it when she'd accomplished something meaningful. Standing at her windows overlooking the city that had been both challenge and opportunity throughout her career, Nia raised the glass in a private toast. Not to victory exactly, because the battle for dignity and equity was ongoing and probably endless. Not to revenge, because watching Frost and Sterling collapse had brought more sadness than satisfaction. Instead, she toasted to the simple act of refusing to accept mistreatment, refusing to compromise standards, refusing to make herself smaller for other people's comfort. That refusal had cost something. It had also built something. And standing here in this moment, surrounded by evidence that resistance could be productive and that principle could coexist with success, Nia felt the complicated satisfaction of someone who'd made hard choices for the right reasons and survived the consequences intact. The city glittered beyond her windows, 10 million stories unfolding simultaneously in the vast urban ecosystem that cared nothing for individual dramas, but that was nonetheless shaped by the accumulated choices of everyone within it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, market pressures and client demands and the constant tension between ideals and reality. Next month would test whether their principles could survive contact with actual operations. Next year would reveal whether Carter Morrison Capital could truly be different or would eventually replicate the same problems they'd sought to transcend. But tonight, Nia allowed herself to believe that the handshake Evelyn Frost had refused, that simple gesture of professional respect that should have been unremarkable, had somehow mattered. Not because one woman's humiliation had destroyed a century-old firm, but because that woman's refusal to accept humiliation had catalyzed 1,000 smaller acts of resistance, had given permission to others to demand better, had demonstrated that power wielded with principle could reshape more than just individual outcomes. She finished her wine as midnight approached, marking the end of this launch day and the beginning of whatever came next. The photograph of her grandmother still sat on her desk, that stern, beautiful face that had witnessed so much indignity and borne it with grace, not because grace was easy, but because survival required it. Nia looked at that image and understood with sudden clarity that her grandmother's keeping her head down and Nia's keeping her head up were part of the same continuous story, the same long arc toward a world where dignity wasn't something you had to fight for, but something you could simply expect. "We did it, Grandma," Nia said quietly to the photograph, to the memory, to the legacy that had shaped everything she'd become. We built something worth building. And in the vast indifference of the city night, in the ongoing flow of lives and choices and consequences that would continue long after this particular story concluded, that seemed like enough. Not perfect, not painless, not without cost or complication, but enough. Nia turned off the lights and went to bed, ready for whatever morning would bring, secure in the knowledge that when she'd been asked to choose between her dignity and her comfort, between her principles and her convenience, between keeping her head down and keeping it up, she'd chosen well. The handshake that Evelyn Frost had refused had become something larger than either of them could have predicted. It had become a question that thousands of people were now asking themselves: what are you willing to accept? What are you willing to refuse? Where is the line that, once crossed, demands consequences rather than accommodation? Nia had drawn her line and defended it. The world had watched and drawn its own conclusions. And somewhere in that intersection of individual choice and collective witness, something had shifted. Small, perhaps. Insufficient, certainly, but real nonetheless. She fell asleep thinking not about Evelyn or Frost and Sterling or even Carter Morris and Capital, but about all the people who'd ever extended their hands in professional spaces and had those gestures refused, who'd been told implicitly or explicitly that they didn't quite belong, who'd faced the choice between accepting less and demanding more. Some of them would keep their heads down, and that was survival, and there was no shame in it. Some of them would keep their heads up, and that was resistance, and there was power in it. And the world would continue its slow, uneven evolution towards something better, shaped by the accumulated courage of everyone who decided that basic dignity was worth defending, even when defending it was difficult. That, Nia thought, as sleep finally claimed her, was what the refused handshake had really been about. Not one woman's humiliation or one firm's collapse, but the simple revolutionary act of saying no to mistreatment and meaning it completely, whatever the cost. And in the morning, when she woke to begin the work of actually running Carter Morris and Capital with all its challenges and uncertainties, she would carry that clarity forward, the understanding that some battles were worth fighting, not because you were guaranteed to win, but because refusing to fight meant accepting defeat as inevitable. The city would wake with her, indifferent and eternal, continuing its relentless motion. But within that motion, small changes would compound into larger shifts. Individual choices would aggregate into cultural transformation, and the woman who'd once had her handshake refused would be building something that made such refusals harder to justify and easier to contest. That was enough. That was everything. That was the legacy worth leaving.